Good afternoon, welcome to the program. As we are on countdown, election watch, waiting for the Prime Minister to visit the Governor-General. We're expecting over the next few days, most likely it looks like on the weekend, to officially fire the starter's gun for campaign 2022. To discuss that and all the other issues of the day, I'm joined by Defence Minister Peter Dutton. Minister, thanks for joining me. Before we get to some of the issues in the hypersonic missiles and so on that have been announced this week, you've also announced today an interesting measure for cadets, $1 billion as a boost for the ADF cadets, and Peter Cosgrove to become the patron of the ADF cadets program. Is that right?
Kieran, that's certainly right. There's a huge investment that we're making into the reserves and also into cadets. The units, do a great job as a feeder into the ADF, and I think it's a wonderful community service. People who volunteer through the Cadet Corps, and Sir Peter Cosgrove has been very kind in accepting the offer to be the patron of the cadet movement in Australia. So we really want to ramp up and increase the numbers of young people going into cadets, particularly from regional areas. And we're going to ramp up the numbers across the ADF, as you know, over the course of the next few years. I think it's a really exciting announcement, and I think the upgrades will be warranted. There's some older facilities, and we want modern facilities to attract and to retain those cadets.
On that hypersonic missile announcement this week, is it fair to say that we've got a lot of catch-up ahead of us, given where China is at with its capacity on this front?
Kieran, I don't think 2 years ago, 3 years ago, people were saying that Putin was going to go into the Ukraine. 2 or 3 years ago, 5 years ago, people weren't talking about the direction of China under President Xi. So I think we need to be realistic about what the circumstances and what the time dictates. Everybody's 2020 in hindsight, but over the course of the last 12 months, I've done my level best to increase the capability within the Australian Defence Force, significant investments, not just in our people, but in infrastructure and equipment as well. And the reality is that we're an island nation, a long distance from anywhere. We're not a landlocked country, like we would be if we were in parts of Asia or in Europe. So we need to have the appropriate equipment, and that does include long-range missiles, but it also includes having the technology and working on the technology with partners that can counter a hypersonic attack. And the science is not settled on that yet. It's very much underway at the moment in a very strong collaboration with the US and the UK, and that'll continue under AUKUS.
But at the moment, there is no known defence, is there, to the attack from hypersonic missiles?
Exactly right. I mean, people look at the situation in Israel, for example, where they're able to put up their shield and stop some of the rudimentary rockets coming across the border. But where you've got modern age, cutting edge technologies deployed by Russia or China, for example, there is no defence against that. There's no shield that you can put up. And we know that China can strike any capital city from mainland China, and that's a very significant issue for us to contemplate. I believe very strongly our country needs to be in a strong position to maintain peace and to deter any aggression against our country or indeed in the region.
You said this week that there's the potential of conflict in our area in a couple of years. Is it really a likely potential in your mind, or are you talking sort of a far-fetched scenario? How do you see that?
Well, Kieran, I can't go into the intelligence that I receive or that ADF is able to collate, but I am concerned, and I mean, there's no, I'm sort of a straight talker, I guess, so strip away the politics of it. I am worried about over the next few years and over the next decade, because I think China will be emboldened by what they've seen in the Ukraine, not dissuaded from the course that they're taking. And the 20 points of military presence that China now has in the South China Sea, the clashes on the land border with India, what we're seeing in the East China Sea, the provocation against the Japanese Coast Guard. These are all very significant concerns. The amassing of nuclear weapons by China, the massive ramp up of their military assets. And as we know, they're trying to put a military base into PNG and obviously worrying signs coming out of the Solomon Islands also.
Kristina Keneally from Labor front bench said this week that your remarks were inflammatory and talking up war doesn't help anyone. What do you say to that critique?
Well, I'd say that she doesn't have a clue, not a clue. And it's embarrassing, actually, for Anthony Albanese. He doesn't know who his national security team will be. For goodness sake, it can't be Kristina Keneally in Home Affairs. The place will shut down. People flood across the borders. The cancellation of visas would stop overnight, and Kristina Keneally would be sitting down in some, kumbaya pose, hoping that everything is okay. She would be a disaster for this country. She's proven that as the Premier in New South Wales. She's been on the wrong side of every decision, made every bad judgment in her shadow portfolio. And, she was going to be punted by Bill Shorten to the United States as the ambassador there. We know that. So maybe she doesn't even stick around. And as for Brendan O'Connor, well, Brendan is just hapless. I mean, that's the best and kindest thing you could say about Brendan. But, of course, Anthony Albanese doesn't even want him to be the Defence Minister after the election. So what we know about Labor is that they always cut money from defence when they're in government. They say when they're in opposition they're going to do the same, and it's just a carbon copy of the coalition, because they just want to get through the election without talking about the reality of defence. And this election has at the centre, I believe, for the first time in a long time, the issue of defence, who is best able to deal with the threats. And Labor is a very risky proposition at this election.
The Prime Minister seemed to mop up some comments he made yesterday about the next generation of subs, the AUKUS nuclear-powered subs, where he said yesterday he didn't guarantee they'd be built in Adelaide. Today he's saying that policy hasn't changed. What is the situation when it comes to that? Because it's fiercely guarded, as you know, that capacity in South Australia.
Yeah, well, look, Kieran, we're going to have about 15,000 jobs by the end of the decade in naval shipbuilding in our country. 5,000 of those will be in South Australia. We've got frigates being built there. We want to, do significant works there. My biggest concern, to be honest, is in both Osborne and Henderson in WA and in Henderson in WA and Osborne in South Australia, where we're going to get the workforce from. I think as you look across the economy at the moment, with unemployment at the lowest rate since the 1970s, there are labour market shortages, and I want to make sure that we can get the skill and keep it. So there'll be no shortage of work in South Australia. We're absolutely committed to shipbuilding in South Australia. And I went back and had a look at the Prime Minister's comments. I honestly think there's people are a bit hypersensitive at the moment in their interpretation of these comments. He was very clear in what he had to say, and I don't think, frankly, it's a departure from what he or I have said before that.
A couple of quick ones before you go. Labor is calling for Russian diplomats to be expelled in the wake of, amid ongoing war crimes in Ukraine. You'd obviously see that many people would support that, given what we're seeing on our TV screens every day.
Well, just horrific what we're seeing, and the brutality, the war crimes that have been committed. It's an atrocity, and President Xi needs to pick up the phone to President Putin today and to stop this carnage and to get Russia out of the Ukraine. Let's be very clear about it. President Xi is the only person in the world that has that level of influence over President Putin, and we can argue about sanctions, and they've been effective. We can provide defence materiel, we can provide humanitarian assistance, but in the end we want Russia out of the Ukraine. That's the most important thing that can happen, Kieran, and I hope that it can happen tomorrow. Of course, Anthony Albanese, again, has made these comments without any briefing from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. The National Security Committee deals with these issues and considers the ramifications, what it would mean if we had Australian citizens who required help in Russia, if our diplomats had been expelled. We have to weigh up all of those calculations. And at the moment, Anthony Albanese is playing politics with this issue. And frankly, it's too serious an issue to be kicked around like a political football. And I think it demonstrates, frankly, that in 25 years of Parliament, no Labor leader has seen fit to appoint Anthony Albanese to a national security portfolio, and he demonstrates on a daily basis why.
Final issue, this suggestion by the government that Labor's lifted the lid on tax, the tax to GDP ratio, that cap the government set 23.9% tax to GDP. Jim Chalmers didn't confirm they'd keep that, but is that because he's looking at cracking down on multinationals, on tax avoidance?
Kieran, it's not. I mean, just let's look at the government that Jim Chalmers was a part of. He was the chief of staff, remember, to Wayne Swan. He was one of the architects of, the Swan budgets, and they had the school halls and the wasted billions of dollars, cash for clunkers, grocery watch, fuel watch. I mean, Jim Chalmers was the architect of all of that. Do you think he's changed his spots over the course of their time in opposition? Of course he hasn't. And, Jim Chalmers gave, I think, probably a bit of a slip of the tongue remark here, where they are going to increase taxes. I mean, that's why they're talking now about giving themselves headroom and increasing the tax take. It won't just be multinationals, it'll be businesses, it'll be trusts, it'll be families. And the fact is that Labor always has a spending problem. They spend too much and they have to pay for it, and they increase taxes, which really stifles the economy and it drives up interest rates. So not only will you have higher taxes, but higher interest rates under Labor. And I think Jim Chalmers has belled the cat, but don't just allow him to walk away from it like he didn't say what he said. It's on the record now, and it's the first glimpse into what an Albanese government would look like, which would mean for ordinary Australians much higher taxes. I've
just seen some news here. George Christensen has left the LNPs, obviously left the Parliament, but he's issued a statement saying his reasons are manifold. He outlined some in his final speech, but leaving the LNP, he's obviously a popular figure up in that part of Queensland. Is that a bit of a setback for some of the LNP chances in Queensland now?
Well, we've got a great candidate in Dawson, and to George's credit, he's been providing a lot of assistance to that candidate. I'm very grateful for that. George is, frankly, a person that's underestimated by many. I suspect George will find a place in the media at some point. He courts controversy. He enjoys making statements that are provocative, and he'll pop up somewhere in a different role. But I know that what he wants most is to see the coalition return, because he knows that for Central Queensland and for Western Queensland, for far North Queensland, the Labor Party would be a disaster.
Peter Dutton, appreciate your time as always. Thanks.
Thanks, Kieran. Thank you.